Good evening and welcome to Crossroads. The United States and other Western countries are being flooded with illegal immigrants. The so-called refugees are often coming from a handful of countries under socialist dictatorships. Many others are coming from countries that have been destabilized by gangs and by terror networks. Yet what's less talked about is the nuance between all of these, the overlap between socialist regimes, organized crime, and global terrorism. Now, it was known in the past that terror networks use drugs to finance their operations. We paid attention to the poppy fields in Afghanistan and the international market for opium, but we paid less attention to the narco-terrorist organizations that have found their way around Latin America. We don't talk as much about the influence of Russia, China, and Iran in the region. We don't discuss Hezbollah's networks and political parties. We don't talk about the network behind the Mexican cartels tied in with international powers. And at the very least, the issue is not well known in the public. Now, when we talk about drugs, we mostly talk about Mexican cartels. They get their precursor chemicals and synthetic drugs mainly from China. Money laundering is also handled by China, often through casinos such as with the so-called Vancouver model in Canada. Lower-level trades are often done by street gangs. The full network of this forms a sort of underworld order. Now, in the surface world, we have multi-billion-dollar companies and brands that we all know. It's the same in the criminal world. There are multi-billion-dollar industries in drugs, human trafficking, money laundering, and, well, things a whole lot worse than those. There's a sort of order between street gangs, organized criminal networks, and even entire countries that use this alternative global economy as a way to bypass the sanctions of the surface world order, while advancing their own global interests, notably. Now, global terrorism is a key part in all of this. The drugs and organized crime are a foundational part of their system. In the United States, one of the main agencies that helps fight this network is the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration. One of the DEA's key branches that oversees interagency support for field investigations into terrorist networks tied in with the system is the Counter-Narco-Terrorism Operations Center, which is under the Special Operations Division. Back in January of 2020, John Fernandez, a special agent in charge of that center, he gave a public speech at the Washington Institute describing the real picture of international drug trade. Watch.
Of the 68 FTOs, foreign terrorist organizations designated by the State Department, DEA has linked 25 of those to some form of drug trafficking or role in the drug trade. If you notice, IRGC was added last year in 2019.
Now, did you get that? The U.S. State Department has defined 68 foreign terrorist organizations. These are most of the known and designated terrorist groups in the world. And 25 of them, which is almost half, are involved in the drug trade. If you look at the infographic shown in John Fernandez's speech, you'd also notice something interesting. Almost every group on that list is tied to either Iran or is a Maoist group with ties to the Chinese Communist Party. On the list of foreign terrorist organizations engaged in drug trafficking are names we're now seeing in news headlines around the terror attacks against Israel, including Hamas and Hezbollah. Now, as John Fernandez noted as well, they added the IRGC to that list in 2019. The IRGC is one of the main branches of Iran's military. So why is the military of a country listed as a foreign terrorist organization? A foreign terrorist organization which in this case plays a key role in the international drug trade. Well, it goes back to that alternative world order I mentioned. Let's call it a new underworld order in this case. In my own work as an investigative journalist, I've encountered many of these networks. When I was investigating CCP front operations, I found that Tongs, which are Chinese fraternal organizations throughout the United States and the world, they play a key role in the regime's operations to subvert the United States and other countries. Some of these have recently been referred to as these so-called Chinese police stations operating in the U.S. Under many tongues are the triads, the Chinese mafia. And like most groups of this nature, whether it's the Mexican cartels or Hamas or many others, they often have both legitimate and illegitimate operations. For example, they might have humanitarian efforts. Some have hospitals, some do community outreach programs, but they also have the flip side, and they will use the legitimate side to gain access to people of power. With Chinese espionage and drug trade, the CCP has a government branch that uses them. It's the United Front Work Department. And this network engages in what's called leadership capture. They compromise our politicians. They invite business and university professors on trips to China. They attempt to co-opt and then compromise the systems and individuals who steer the nations. This forms the basis of CCP espionage and subversion. Now, similar systems exist for other countries as well. When I was researching CCP spy networks, one of the big questions I had was, why do they care about drugs? What are the uses of criminal networks? Well, part of that is destabilization. They can create crime. They can poison the youth of a nation. With fentanyl, they can kill more Americans every single year than we lost in the entire war in Vietnam. But even beyond this, it also creates a type of alternative economy and the entire system around that, which is outside international regulations and sanctions. Now, that alternative economy is not just money. Again, it's a system. It's people, it's businesses, it's institutions. One of the key interests for the CCP on a military level is to use that control of the drug trade to give them control of smuggling networks. It gives them access to people willing to break laws of a country. It gives them access to people who are willing to kill, and even to powerful figures who are willing to harm or betray the people of their own countries. When you combine those with smuggling channels, what does that mean? Well, it means they can bring whatever they want into a country without alerting the authorities. Think guns, think fighters, even types of weapons far worse than anything we've experienced. And there's also deeper interconnections between various networks, including between terror groups and cartels that are otherwise not involved in these types of operations the other one is doing. The Wilson Center reported in 2018, for years, Hezbollah has had business links to drug cartels, especially in South America. Its operatives have helped move narcotics and laundered the proceeds of sales to finance its operations in Syria, as well as its terrorist wing. Now, a lot of this goes back to 2010. Back when the war on terror was still going strong in the United States. It was one of the biggest topics we had. Business Insider reported this. Islamic terrorist groups are setting up shop in Mexico and forming alarming ties with the country's brutal drug cartels. The alerts stem from a leaked Tucson Police Department memo from September of 2010. The memo noted that Hezbollah had established operations and even had large stockpiles of weapons in Mexico that included assault rifles, hand grenades, C4 explosives, and anti-tank munitions. Now, why would Hezbollah be in Mexico? Well, because of its proximity to the United States. In fact, that Tucson police memo said that Hezbollah's main goal is to cast out any form of Israeli rule and/or occupation. Due to the U.S. political and financial support of Israel, Hezbollah regards our nation as a viable target. And that's the exact quote. Now, with this knowledge in hand, wouldn't the U.S. work to root out Hezbollah terror influence throughout Latin America? Well, they were. But it turned out that Barack Obama, when he was president, he put a stop to that. Politico reported in 2017 that Obama allegedly ended that whole investigation in order to strike deals with Iran. He let Hezbollah off the hook. However, the investigations into these organizations were reopened under President Donald Trump. In 2018, then Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced a transnational organized crime task force to target 5 groups of interest: MS-13, the CJNG, the Sinaloa cartel, the Clan de Golfo, and Hezbollah. The U.S. designated drug cartels, together with Hezbollah, as the greatest threats we face, because of how intertwined cartel drug trafficking and Hezbollah's terrorism is. Now, understand what's happening in this country right now, and understand how this relates to what is happening in the broader world. We're already in an undeclared war with the Chinese Communist Party. In fact, the Chinese Communist Party openly declared a people's war on the United States. We're already in a proxy war with Russia over Ukraine. China and Russia have a no-limits agreement signed right before the whole invasion of Ukraine. And war with either of them is war with the bloc of nations they command. As I mentioned previously and exposed on my documentary, The Final War, last year, the CCP has an agenda to pool the United States into 4 separate wars. One of those, they say, needs to be a war on terrorism. And with the recent terror attacks against Israel, it's also possible we could very soon be in a proxy war with Iran. That will be Hamas, Hezbollah, and the IRGC. Connected to that will be networks I just discussed on the underworld order, the networks of international organized crime and terrorism. And how does all this relate to our open border, you might ask? Well, here are some hidden cameras taken from the U.S.-Mexico border in remote Arizona over the course of several years. These videos were shared with us by Arizona Border Recon. These show what appear to be drug traffickers of the cartels in military fatigues and walking along the border, and footage of what appears to be a Middle Eastern man you can see here being escorted into the United States by heavily armed men. The man sitting on the gate in civilian clothing was of particular note in these videos. So this is what's happening at our border. As we've discussed, the drug trade and human trafficking are being facilitated by the cartels. Open border policies have kicked these into overdrive. There are concerns now that Hezbollah could engage in terror attacks against America, and it was known they already had weapons caches in Mexico. And now, because of the cost of taking care of the illegal immigrants, well, folks, that's it for YouTube. For the rest of the episode, come join us on Epoch TV, where you can, of course, watch a lot of our great programs, original documentaries, movies, shows, the rest of my show, and of course, you also help us keep doing what we're doing. We have a lot of great content to go into still. We're going to have Julie Kelly with us talking about how MAGA supporters are being targeted allegedly by the FBI as terrorists. The FBI created a new designator for this. We'll be explaining the nuance of it and what it actually means. Again, that's on Epoch TV, EpochTV.com, and I will see you there. What is the real story of America? Why did the Founding Fathers choose a republic over a democracy? And what would the world be if the bedrock of the American Constitution was lost?